$500. I'll give you $500, Liam. Just sit still for even 5 minutes. The absurdly generous offer was met with a peal of laughter. Liam, a small tornado in a striped outfit, zipped past his father, running along the polished railing of the first-class deck. "Liam, stop! Listen to me, that's dangerous!" Ethan Hayes shouted, his voice losing its usual calm. Clink. The sound of a glass being set down pointedly on a nearby table. Ethan felt his cheeks flush hot. The man accustomed to commanding an entire corporation was now powerless against a 10-year-old boy, and worse, under the scrutiny of dozens of judging eyes. He lunged to grab his son's arm, but Liam deftly dodged him and continued his conquest of the deck. Ethan stood frozen, his hands dropping to his sides in defeat. Just then, a gentle voice came from behind him. "Would you like me to try, sir?" Ethan turned. A girl in a high school hoodie, holding a sketchbook, was looking directly at him. Her eyes were clear and calm, a stark contrast to the storm he was facing. He stared for a moment, not understanding what she was offering to try. "Try?" Ethan stammered, still flustered. Without waiting for him to ask more, the girl gave a small, confident smile. She didn't speak to him, but instead turned her attention to the little whirlwind causing chaos on the deck. Instead of shouting over the wind, she simply took a step forward, calmly approaching Liam. Ethan held his breath, expecting his son to run straight into her. But he didn't. The girl didn't block Liam's path. She simply held out her sketchbook, flipped to a page with a drawing of an old pirate ship battling the giant tentacles of a sea monster. "Captain," her voice rang out, clear and mysterious, "your compass is pointing the wrong way. The treasure isn't in that direction." Liam, who had just ignored a $500 offer, skidded to a halt, his expensive sneakers nearly slipping on the wooden deck. He whipped around, his eyes wide as he stared at the strange girl and the drawing in her hand. "What treasure?" Sophia smiled, lowering the sketchbook. "A sea expedition," she whispered, as if sharing a national secret. "I have the map to the hiding place of the sea dragon's fang, but it only appears in the light of the setting Sunday. We have to find it before night swallows the ship." The impossible happened. Liam, the boy who couldn't sit still for more than 30 seconds, became astonishingly well-behaved. Without a word, he silently followed Sophia to her little corner. He sat down beside her, his eyes glued to the sketchbook, completely captivated by the world she had just created. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his mouth agape. The surrounding passengers, who had been scowling, were now silent, staring in amazement at the scene. From where he stood, Ethan could hear the melodic rise and fall of Sophia's storytelling. She wasn't just talking. She was painting an entire ocean with her words. "Look, that cloud isn't a cloud. It's the breath of the oldest humpback whale in the ocean. And the sound of the waves against the hull, that's the mermaids knocking, asking if we brought any shimmering shells to trade for stars." Liam sat perfectly still, letting out an occasional wow of admiration. The storm had passed. The chaos had been replaced by an enchanting quiet. Ethan stared at the young girl in the simple hoodie. She hadn't used money or threats. She had used only a pencil, an old notebook, and a phenomenal imagination to tame his unruly son. After nearly an hour, as the sunset gave way to the first stars in the sky, Liam finally let out a long yawn. He rested his head on Sophia's shoulder, his eyes heavy but still trying to focus on the page. The sea expedition had apparently drained all the energy from the little captain. Ethan approached cautiously, his voice now filled with a mixture of embarrassment and sincere gratitude. I really don't know how to thank you. You saved me back there. He instinctively reached for his wallet again. I can pay you. Sophia looked up, her eyes sparkling in the soft yellow light of the deck lamps. She shook her head gently, a warm smile on her lips. There's no need, sir. I'm just glad Liam enjoyed the stories. Just then, Liam, half asleep, reached out and turned to another page in the sketchbook. He pointed at it, his voice a mumble. You drew stars, too, and a house. A really, really tall house. Curious, Ethan leaned in to look at the worn notebook. He was stunned. What he saw were no longer imaginary sea monsters or pirate ships. Before him were sketches of complex architectural structures drawn with astonishingly straight and precise lines. A building with a dome that mimicked the constellation Orion, suspension bridges as delicate as the Milky Way, and detailed notes on light angles, materials, and structural integrity. Flipping to another page, he was even more amazed. There were pages of astronomical notes, with the orbits of planets carefully drawn and constellations meticulously labeled. This wasn't the work of a teenager doodling for fun. This was the work of a true talent, a mind that was both fantastically creative and rigorously structured. My God, Ethan breathed, his voice full of awe. These aren't just drawings. Sophia seemed a little shy, smoothing down the frayed edge of the paper. It's my passion. She paused, then added in a more formal tone, actually, I'm on my way to San Francisco for the National Young Architects Design Showcase. Ethan's head snapped up, admiration clear in his eyes. A national competition? Yes, sir. Sophia nodded. The grand prize is a full scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. It's my dream. She glanced down at the luxurious ship gliding through the night, her voice growing softer. The travel expenses, they were actually crowdfunded by people in my neighborhood back in Boston. Everyone pitched in a little just to give me a chance to get here. Ethan settled a sleeping Liam comfortably on a nearby lounge chair, covering him with a light blanket. He returned to Sophia with 2 cups of hot chocolate he'd just ordered from a steward. He handed one to her. Here, this will warm you up, he said. His tone completely changed, devoid of any earlier stress. He sat down across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. Your architectural drawings, they incorporate so many elements of the stars and the sea. That's not a coincidence, is it? Sophia accepted the hot chocolate, the warmth spreading through her hands. No, sir, she replied, her gaze fixed on the silver moon hanging over the dark sea. To me, the greatest architecture must be in harmony with the universe. It needs to know where and when to welcome the sunlight, and it must know how to gaze at the stars. She pointed to a bright dot in the distance. That's the North Star. Sailors use it for navigation. If you know how to read the stars, you'll never be lost. She spoke of ocean currents, of how ancient ships navigated coastlines by observing constellations, all with a deep, passionate understanding, as if she'd spent her entire life at sea. Ethan listened, increasingly captivated. Your knowledge, it goes far beyond what's in books. You speak like a true mariner. The smile on Sophia's lips faded. She looked down at the hot chocolate in her hands, her recent animation replaced by a quiet sadness. My father, she began, her voice softening. He used to be a sailor. The words used to be hung in the night air. Ethan felt their weight. He didn't press, just waited silently. He was lost at sea many years ago, Sophia continued, her voice steady, but Ethan could see the deep pain in her clear eyes. His ship was caught in a massive storm. They never found anything. A silence fell between them. The sound of the waves against the hull seemed to grow more poignant. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said softly, and his words were completely genuine. "Your mother she must be so proud of you." Sophia gave a slight shake of her head, a tear welling up before she blinked it back. "My mom, she's not well. She's very sick." She looked directly at Ethan, and for a moment, he no longer saw a 16-year-old girl, but a young woman forced to grow up too soon, carrying an unimaginable burden on her shoulders. "That's why I have to win this scholarship, to take care of her. Right now, I go to school and work part-time at a local bakery to make ends meet." Ethan was completely speechless. He thought of his idiotic $500 offer. To him, that sum was just a number to solve an annoyance. To this girl, it could have been her mother's medication, a month's worth of groceries. Ethan set his empty mug down, his heart heavy with her story. He couldn't just let this go. He was an investor. His instinct was to see value and opportunity where others missed it. But this time, it wasn't a business deal. It was far more personal. "Sophia," he said, his voice serious, "I can't let you handle all of this alone. I want to help. Tuition, living expenses at MIT, your mother's medical bills, just name a number." He pulled out an expensive fountain pen and a business card. "I can fund your entire education. Consider it an investment in talent." It was how he solved every problem, with money and influence. He believed it was the best, most practical offer she could receive. But Sophia shook her head firmly. "I appreciate your kindness, sir. I really do," she said, and the sincerity in her voice made it clear this wasn't a rejection born of pride. "But that scholarship, I want to earn it myself. It's a promise I made to my mom, and to my dad, too." Surprised, Ethan put his pen away. "Then, how can I help you? At least let me pay you for tonight. You helped me more than you know." Sophia was silent for a long moment, her eyes gazing out at the dark sea as if weighing something incredibly important. Finally, she turned to look directly at Ethan. "Not with money, sir," she said slowly. "But there is one thing, something that maybe only a person like you could help with." "Name it," Ethan replied instantly without hesitation. "My father, his name was Michael Sullivan," Sophia said, and speaking the name seemed to take all her courage. "He was a marine engineer. All I know is that the last ship he worked on belonged to a very large international shipping company, possibly based in Houston. I've tried to find out more, but I'm just a kid. Nobody replies to my emails." She took a deep breath. "You're an international investor. You have connections. I'm not asking you to find him. That's probably impossible. I just want to know what really happened to that ship. A report, an archive file, any information at all. So my mom. And so I can finally have some closure." Her request wasn't for a material gift, but for a glimmer of hope, a truth to soothe a wound that had festered for years. Ethan was deeply moved. He looked into the expectant eyes of the 16-year-old girl shouldering the responsibility of an entire family. He saw in them the image of a father she had never stopped searching for, and an extraordinary talent being stifled by the burdens of life. Helping her was no longer a choice. It was something he had to do. He nodded, his voice firm and authoritative, the same tone he used in the boardroom. "Done. I give you my word, Sophia. I'll use every connection I have. I will find out what happened to your father, Michael Sullivan. I won't forget that name." It wasn't just a promise. It was a contract, sealed not with ink, but with empathy and compassion on a ship in the middle of the night. The following days on the cruise to San Francisco turned into a strange, unspoken arrangement. On the surface, they looked like a small family on vacation. Ethan, no longer a stressed-out parent, now sat calmly reading on the deck, occasionally looking up to smile as Liam eagerly learned to draw constellations from Sophia. The boy was completely won over by his new big sister. But behind that peaceful facade, a secret investigation was proceeding at breakneck speed. Whenever he had a moment alone in his luxury suite, Ethan transformed back into the man of business. Discreet calls were made on a satellite phone, encrypted emails sent to his most trusted network of private investigators. Name: Michael Sullivan, Marine engineer, U.S. citizen. Went missing about 10 years ago. He commanded over the phone, his voice sharp and efficient. Scour the records of every major shipping company in Houston, New Orleans, and Miami. I want the name of the last vessel he served on and the official incident report. Information trickled in. First came confirmation of the name Michael Sullivan on the roster of a massive shipping conglomerate based in Houston. Then, the name of the ship, the Wanderer's Gambit. Finally, just as their cruise ship docked in San Francisco and they had settled into a luxury hotel, the decisive email arrived. Ethan opened it late at night, long after Liam was asleep. The official report was clear. 10 years ago, the Wanderer's Gambit had sailed into a Category 5 hurricane off the East Coast. A distress signal was sent, but by the time rescue teams arrived, they found only the heavily damaged vessel, adrift and empty. Not a single trace of the crew was ever found. The report concluded with a chilling line that made Ethan hold his breath. Crew members are presumed lost, but were never officially confirmed as deceased. His heart pounded. Never confirmed as deceased. The phrase didn't offer closure. It opened a door to a fragile and potentially painful hope. Meanwhile, Sophia's journey continued in parallel, though far from silently. She spent most of her time perfecting her design for the competition. Her hotel room was littered with blueprints and cardboard models. She explained her Tidal City concept to Liam, a coastal community that could power itself with tidal energy and featured a public observatory looking out over the ocean. But Ethan, with his keen eye, noticed that her mind was never entirely there. Whenever she finished a complex architectural detail, her hand would pause, and her gaze would drift unconsciously toward the balcony, toward the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Her artistic ambition burned brightly, but it was always shadowed by a grief that had never faded. The sea, the endless source of her design inspiration, was also the thing that had taken her father. Ethan and Liam had become her temporary family, her only audience and support system in a strange city. Sophia had taught Ethan how to patiently listen to Liam's rambling stories. In turn, Ethan made sure she had everything she needed to prepare. But he kept the information he'd found a secret, feeling its weight on his shoulders. He knew he was holding a truth that could either give flight to Sophia's dreams or shatter them at the last moment. The grand auditorium of the San Francisco Architectural Institute was silent, filled only by Sophia's clear, confident voice. She stood on stage, illuminated by a spotlight, next to her intricate model of the Tidal City. Every eye, from the prestigious panel of judges to the audience, was fixed on her. In the front row, Ethan sat bolt upright, Liam unusually focused beside him. He felt a swell of pride in his chest, as if Sophia were his own. She presented not just with technical figures and drawings, but with her entire soul. Each building is not just oriented to the sea for the view, Sophia explained, her hand gliding lightly over the model, but is designed to listen. To listen to the waves, the wind, the call of the ocean. It is about connection, not conquest. At that exact moment, the phone in Ethan's pocket buzzed violently. He frowned, ready to silence it. Nothing could be allowed to break Sophia's moment. But when he glanced at the screen, the name Investigator Johnson made him freeze. This was the man he had hired, the best of the best. A call at this time could only mean one thing: urgent news. Trying not to make a sound, he slipped out of his seat, whispering to Liam, "I'll be right back. Stay put." He stepped into the empty hallway, his heart beating faster. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Johnson?" "Mr. Hayes." The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "We have a breakthrough. This isn't a rumor. We've made a preliminary verification." Ethan held his breath. "Go on." "New Orleans. The Old Port District. There's a man who has been living there for over a decade. Does odd jobs at the shipyards. The locals call him Forgotten Mike because he has amnesia from a sea accident he never talks about." Ethan's ears were ringing. Description: mid-50s. Graying hair. Has a small scar over his left eyebrow. The physical profile, the age, it's a perfect match for Michael Sullivan's file. Ethan leaned against the cool wall behind him for support. New Orleans. A flight away. A man with amnesia. Never confirmed as deceased. All the pieces of the puzzle suddenly slammed together with terrifying speed. He turned and looked through the glass door into the auditorium. Sophia was at the end of her presentation, her face glowing with passion. He could hear her voice faintly. "And so, the title city is not just a place to live. It is a place to hope." Her use of the word hope struck him like a physical blow. He looked down at the phone in his hand, then back at the girl shining on the stage. He was holding a truth with the force of an earthquake. He could tell her right now, give her the greatest hope of her life, but it would almost certainly destroy the most important moment of her career. Or he could stay silent, let her fulfill her dream, but every passing second would be a second he was hiding the truth. Ethan Hayes' entire world shrank to this single fateful choice: family or career, the past or the future. He had to decide, and he had to decide now. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway, the thumping of his own heart louder than Sophia's voice echoing from the auditorium. He thought of Liam, of his own helplessness on the ship's deck, of how Sophia had taught him that connection was more valuable than money. He thought of the promise he had made to her. To keep this secret even for 10 more minutes would be a betrayal. Family. It was what this girl had lost, what she was fighting to protect. It had to come first. He took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and walked quickly and quietly down the side aisle. Sophia had just finished her main presentation and was preparing for the Q&A with the judges. He positioned himself in the wings, where only she could clearly see him. He said nothing, just looked directly into her eyes, his own gaze conveying all the urgency and meaning of the news he was about to deliver. Sophia's brow furrowed slightly. She sensed something monumental was happening. A judge began the first question. "Miss Sullivan, your concept of sustainability is impressive, but..." At that moment, Ethan called her name softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Sophia." She turned, their eyes locking across the stage. He spoke, each word clear and deliberate. "We found him. Sophia, we think we found your father." Sophia's world stopped spinning. The microphone on the lectern nearly slipped from her grasp. The entire auditorium, the judges, her architectural model, it all blurred into the background. Only Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "We found your father." Tears began to stream down her face, uncontrollable. A choked sob escaped her, amplified by the microphone, stunning the hall into silence. She raised a hand to her mouth as hot tears traced paths down her cheeks. 10 years of waiting, of faint hope, of unanswered questions, all of it broke open in a single overwhelming moment. But then, in the midst of her emotional storm, she looked down at her Title City model. The project she had poured her heart into, built from the memory of and love for her seafaring father. She suddenly realized this was not the time to break down. This was the moment to turn all of that emotion into strength. Sophia took a shuddering breath, wiping hastily at her tears. She turned back to the judges, her voice still trembling, but now laced with a fierce conviction it hadn't possessed before. "Forgive me," she said, and the entire room held its breath. "You asked about sustainability, but perhaps the most sustainable foundation for any structure is hope." She no longer looked at her prepared notes. She spoke from the heart. "This design wasn't born from numbers or materials. It was born from the afternoons I spent sitting at the harbor, watching the sea, and wondering if a ship would ever bring my father home. It was born from the stars my father taught me to read, the same stars that guided him, and that have now guided this design." Her emotion was no longer a weakness. It had become her most powerful asset. Her speech was no longer a presentation, but a confession, a moving story of loss and faith. Architecture, to me, isn't about building walls. It's about building bridges. Bridges between people, between the past and the future, and sometimes a bridge to help find the way back home. When she finished, the auditorium was silent for a beat, then erupted in thunderous applause. There was little need for deliberation. The head of the judging panel, a distinguished older architect, rose to his feet. He removed his glasses, his eyes filled with respect. "Miss Sullivan," he said, "today we didn't just see an outstanding design. We saw the great heart behind it. The grand prize for this year's National Young Architects Design Showcase goes to you." Sophia cried out again, but this time they were tears of pure joy. She had won. She had kept her promise to her mother. And most importantly, she was about to have the chance to reunite with the father she thought she had lost forever. It was a dual victory, a fateful moment where professional ambition and family longing had finally become one. The flight from San Francisco to New Orleans was wrapped in a tense silence. Sophia sat in the window seat, her hands clenched around the gleaming silver trophy she had just won. But her mind was no longer on her victory. It was flying ahead toward a port city, toward a man she was both desperate and terrified to see again. Liam sat beside her, sensing her anxiety, and gently placed his small hand on hers in a gesture of wordless comfort. Ethan sat across the aisle, his gaze distant. He had arranged everything, but he knew the most critical part, the most human part, was now completely out of his control. Finally, their cab pulled up to the old port district of New Orleans. The salty air mingled with the scent of Creole spices. Amidst the weathered fishing boats and buildings with faded wrought iron balconies, a man stood alone, his back to them, looking out over the Mississippi River. His hair was as white as seafoam. His frame was thin and worn, his back slightly stooped as if from the weight of a forgotten decade. Sophia stepped out of the cab, her legs threatening to give way. Ethan and Liam followed, keeping their distance. "Are you sure it's him?" Sophia whispered, her voice cracking. Ethan just gave a slight nod. As if sensing their presence, the man slowly turned. Time and the sea had carved deep lines into his face, but when their eyes met, the world seemed to stop. It was his eyes. They were the same piercing blue eyes, though now clouded with a fog of confusion and distant sorrow. Sophia recognized them instantly. They were the eyes that looked back at her from old photographs, the eyes of the father she had redrawn 100 times in her memory. She dropped the trophy. It landed softly on the dusty ground, unnoticed. The man stared at her, his expression one of profound confusion. He didn't remember. His mind was a blank slate, but his heart, perhaps, was not. It was as if an invisible thread, long since severed, was struggling to reconnect. Sophia took a slow step forward, then another, as if afraid any sudden movement would shatter the vision before her. Her tears began to fall again, but this time silently. "Dad?" That single word, breathed like a whisper, carried the weight of 10 years of separation. The man flinched. The name Sophia seemed to surface from some deep, dark ocean in his mind, a sound both alien and painfully familiar. He didn't understand why, but his heart ached. She was standing right in front of him now. She raised a trembling hand and gently touched the small scar over his eyebrow, a scar she remembered from childhood. And then she collapsed against his chest, her arms wrapping tightly around this stranger who was her entire world. Her embrace held not just joy, but pain, longing, and forgiveness for all the lost years. The man, after a moment of stunned hesitation, slowly raised his arms and held her back, a paternal instinct he could not explain. Watching from a distance, Ethan and Liam silently witnessed the wordless reunion. They were not intruders. They were the ones who had built the bridge for this to happen. Ethan watched the father and daughter holding each other in the windy port, and he understood. This was the most successful deal of his life. The story was complete. It didn't end with a victory in a prestigious architectural competition, but with a family reborn from loss and oblivion. It all started with a small act of kindness on a ship's deck, a young girl offering a hand to a helpless father. And that simple gesture had launched a fateful voyage that would forever change not one, but 3 lives.